Here we go. So apologies on last week. It was 12 minutes before Mincha when I got the call that there was a Ptira, and I asked them if they want me to come immediately and not go to Mincha, and they said, no, you can go to Mincha, but then I didn't have the heart to then say, oh, and I also have a Gemara here for 45 minutes after that. So I ran right to the house. I apologize that it was so tight with the timing. Let's learn a little bit tonight. We're on Mem Aleph from Bet. I'll tell you what I want to do tonight. Two things. The second thing is to advance in the Gemara and see some beautiful pieces. And Mark Persha and I were discussing a little bit, just very briefly. Last we saw each other in Shul, but I did want to finish up one piece that we were talking about on Mem Aleph Amud Bet about the whole issue of the Matana al Menat Lhachzir, the gift that is on condition that it's going to be returned. So it's a complete gift, but the condition is that it will soon come right back to the original owner. And we had that story on Mem Aleph Amud Bet, you recall, with the Chachamim who are in a boat and are coming on back to shore, but they're still at sea on Sukkot, and only Rabbi Gamliel has the lulav. So lulav means a lulav bundle. He paid an exorbitant sum for it. He takes it, he uses it, he gives Rabbi Yeshua as a matana. Rabbi Yeshua uses it, he's Yotze, gives it to Rabbi Lhachzir ben Azariah, who gives it, gives it to Rabbi Kiva, who then uses it, and then it says V'hechziro Rabbi Gamliel. So he gave it back to him. So Lamu l'meimar hechziro. Why did it say that he returned it to him? And if you are looking in the Gemara with me, I'm Aleph Amud Bet, probably about 10, 12 lines on the up from on the where the narrow lines begin, like from the bottom, I'm saying. So scan your eye from the bottom. There's the wide lines, and the narrow lines go about 10 lines. The first word on the line there is Lamemar, yeah.
41.
Right? So Milta Agav Urche Kamash Malan. We're learning something on the side. We're learning something, a sidebar about this, and that is Matana Amanat Lhachzir Shema Matana. If you give a gift to someone and it's on condition that it needs to be returned, that is still considered a complete gift. Ki ha de amara rava ha helach etrog zeh amanash tachzrei li not lo v'yatza b'hechziro yatza lo hechziro lo yatza, which is amazing. If you stipulate at the time when you're giving the gift, it's on condition that you will return it to me. The failure to return it means the person retroactively is not yotze on their mitzvah fulfillment, which is quite something. So in other words, it's held in abeyance, right? It's like it's not gonna come through. The charge doesn't go through until after you've already returned the gift. But if you don't, you neglect that, so then you lose credit. And this is a question generally just to think about. We'll spend a few minutes just on this before we pick up stakes and move on to the Gemara. What I wanted to show you 2 weeks ago, but we ran out of time, is a machloket between the Rosh, and then though he is an Achron, he can't really argue against them. There is another approach that is brought forward by the Ketzot Hachoshen. So I'm putting it on the screen so you could see it, and we'll look at it inside just to understand what's going on. Right, the Rosh wrote commentary, obviously on Shas, and he has Piskei Halacha at the end. It's like just a compendium of here's the bottom line. So it's not just my perush, but here's like my bottom line. So here's what he writes: the Kitzur Piskei Rosh Masechet Sukka. He explains as follows in Siman Lamed. Ein adam yotzei yedei chavato b'yom tov harishin shel chag b'lulav shel chavero elim kan natan lo matana gemura. Okay, va'afilu matana amanat lhachzir shma matana. Even though it was on the condition that we returned, that's still considered to be a matana. Fine. Ubilvad sheitnenu lo matana gemura amanat lhachzir. It has to be that he gives it to him as a matana gemura on condition that he will return it. Va'achar sheyatzabo tzarich lhachzir v'litno lo. But when he's done, I'm highlighting too much here. After after Siman, who got it from Reuven as a gift, is Yotze, he needs to give it back to him and actually properly return it. Aval, says the Rosh, Im amar lo yehei shelcha ad sheteitze bo v'char kach yehei sheli kiv'tchila lo yatza. But if you made it like a library book, he said, I'm lending it to you. You can use it, But at the moment that you finish, the moment that you're Yotze, I'm just letting you know right now, you're suddenly no longer the owner of it. It's mine immediately, says the Rosh, lo yatsa. It cannot be that there is some kind of like a time limit or a condition when you do X to this object. So whatever it is that I gave you evaporates. He has to give it back to him afterward. Lo yatsa. If he didn't return it, ma yotze. Even if something happened, something went sideways, he wasn't able to return it, too bad for him. He still cannot be yotze with it. That mitzvah. He didn't say. And here, we talked about this last time. We saw Tosfot on the page. Dibur Hamatchil Elim came Natan Lo Matana. At the end of Tosfot, it mentioned this is how the communities function. You had one set of dalminim for the whole community, even if they didn't all say the one saying to the other, Matana Hachzir, Matana Hachzir. Doesn't matter. He's not have to say, I'm giving to his Matana. That was the assumption. And I mentioned that in Shul, we have our 5 sets that we spread around different places in the building. That's the assumption. Now, is it as good as buying your own? If you don't have a choice, so it's better than nothing. If you, I don't know what, you couldn't afford, or you're not so plugged into your Judaism, so you didn't think to even buy one, or for some reason you were prevented. Okay, so you use the Shul edition. And the assumption is stama. So if you don't think that you don't have to return it, though. You have to return it. Even if you didn't give it right back to the person, but you gave it then as a matana. Exactly what we have in our story on Mem Aleph from the bet. A gave to B, to gave to C, to gave to D, and D gave it back to A. That's fine. That's what the Mishnah, the Gemara here describes, happened, right? Rabban Gamliel to Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, to Rabbi Kiva, who then returned it again to Rabban Gamliel, and that's kosher. That's fine. Okay?
Rabbi?
So, yeah, let me take some questions, comments. Go ahead.
Okay, so what happens if the receiver requests, so in our story, so imagine these rabbis sitting around and saying, hey, we only got one set of lulav, and maybe Rabbi Yeshua said, hey, you know what, I got an idea. You give it to me, I'll give it to him, and give it to him, and then we'll return it in the end. So does that somehow invalidate, because the almanat is not from the giver, but established by the givee, meaning you give it to me and then I'll return it. Does that change anything?
It doesn't seem to be. It seems as long as there's a chain, the end of which it gets back to the original owner. Someone had mentioned last time, 2 weeks ago, I think, denial of service. What if you just multiplied that out and it was like, well, I'm going to give it to you eventually, but we have like 1,000 people who still want to use it. So we'll be going until the end of the day. Yeah, but I want it back today, right? Now, he didn't stipulate a day. The assumption is that by the next day, he has to be Yotze again, his mitzvah. So he needs it back.
Yeah.
Right? Assuming he's going to be in Yerushalayim, he's going to be in the Beit HaMikdash. If he's going to be outside the Beit HaMikdash, so it's the Rabbanan. In which case, you could borrow someone else's, in which case, right? But because he's set up the way he did, has to go back to the original owner. That's the point. Must go back to the original owner. If it didn't, it invalidates the whole setup. Yeah? Got it. Okay, now, the Ketzot Hachoshen, the Ritva, I didn't give you the Ritva, but the Ritva basically says the same thing. The Ketzot Hachoshen is an Achron. And the Ketzot Hachoshen says, I hear what they're saying. I can't really disagree with them because they are Rishonim and I'm much, much later. But the truth is, I'm not so keen on what they said. So he quotes this here essentially verbatim, actually. But he adds one other little piece. He quotes from this piece from the Rosh, and then he mentions he paraphrases. If he said to him, it'll be a gift for you until you're yotze with this dalminim. It'll be like it's borrowed, and that you can't do because on the first day has to be lachem, can't be stolen, can't be borrowed, right? So v'teda. So this is it adds this part in. It must be later on in the Rosh. I guess I didn't look far enough. But Teda is like a proof, which we don't have in our copy above. You just saw the whole thing. But the Ketzot Hachoshen's version of the Rosh says the Teda mida Amar Lakam. Further along, it's going to say in the Gemara and Sukka and Mem Vav Menat lo likne inish lo lavli anuka biyamatava kama the anuka mikne kane aknoi lo makne. do not give your lulav to a child on the first day of Sukkot, because the rule with children is they can acquire things, but they cannot transfer property away from themselves. Various understandings about why this is. Perhaps they lack da'at. Another reason, very pragmatically, they would otherwise be taken advantage of. So the halacha actually protects them. They can acquire property, but they can't transfer it out. Yeah, well, if they have a matana gemura in their hand of a daled minim, they can't give it to anyone else. And so the birth of the chinuch sets, right? Birth of the chinuch set for education purposes, which I'm not all that keen on. My rebbeim were not so keen on, because they said, why giving your child like a set that may not even be kosher? Like if chinuch set means like it's more basic, fine. But if chinuch means it's fake, then why don't you just get them a plush one if they're not old enough? But if they're old enough, give them the real deal. But the idea of the chinuch set is it's for kids, and kids can't give them back to adults. And if you gave yours to your child and said, here, you just use mine, and I transfer it over to you, that wouldn't be a good thing. So that's what the Gemara goes on to say later. So if he didn't have to actually give it back in a matana, if the halacha says reasons the Rosh was simply that the individual who used it was yotze, it automatically reverts to the original owner. They don't have to do anything. They don't actually have to transfer ownership back because it automatically reverts. Well, then why did the Gemara say that for a child that's not possible to give them to them, because they can't give it back? They don't have to give it back unless you really do have to give it back. Follow? That's to be an actual transfer. Elavadai, says the Rosh, sarich lachzor velitna b'matana. It must be that you need to give it back as a gift to the original owner. That's in the Rosh. Again, it must be an amalgam of two parts of the Rosh, because I did not see it in Perek Gimel Siman Lamed. And the Ketzot Hachoshen quotes this, and he says, the Ritva wrote the same thing. There's Chidushim on Kiddushin. And nonetheless, Lhachzir is Akna Gemura. It's the Mamon Shalo. Lhachzir Akna Gemura boy. He has to give it back to him completely. Kishar Hakna O de Alma. Mistabashim Shibda Lebalachayim. So Harehu Meshubad Lebalchov. Excuse me. I meant to say, if he encumbered it to someone he owed something else to, another kind of a loan, an obligation. It says Meshubad Umatzir V'Govim Menel Achar Chazara Ad Kalashona. That's the Ritva. He could go and get it because it was totally his property when he had it. Again, when Rabbi Yeshua ben Chanai had not given it to the next person, but he'd given it over, to a child or to someone he owed money to, and said, "Here's your payment." Right. So it would be good. It would work. And so all he's done here, the Ketzot Hachoshen, just quoted these two opinions, and now he dissents. Onam lulei divrei harosh v'aritva yir lefi ani udatim tamat lahachzir hu kamashma'o. If not for what the Rosh wrote, what the Ritva wrote, according to my humble opinion, he says, I think Menat Lhachzir means just that, meaning no need for a mechanism of actually returning it, but rather written into that statement is, it's like a library book. When you're done, it goes back. But it's not, there's no t'nai in the Kinyan. He's giving it to him fully as a matana until he's yotze. It's a total transfer of property, total, but it happens to have a time limit. That's all. That would make it as if it was borrowed. I think in all these cases, it's not a din of show. And here's my proof, he says. My proof is from Perek Yesh Nochlin. Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. So in Perek Yesh Nochlin, Kuf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, there's a debate between Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. And the basic debate is, generally speaking, about whether someone who is given something Menat Lhachzir can sell that object to somebody else or not. Like, are there limits on what he can do? The more we say there are limits, the less it's really what's called a Matana Gemura. The more he has freedom of activity, the more we're going to say that it was a Matana Gemura and it really was a fulfillment of Lachem. And in fact, the Raya for the Ketzot Hachoshen, what he wants to say that yes, you got a complete giving over of an object and yet put a little asterisk and say, but it expires XYZ time, is from this a story. One of the proof texts. This has to do with the whole case having to do with property and in general. But the case given in Parakesh Nocham Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin in Bava Batra is about Sukkot. One of the cases is this: Etrog Ze Natun Lach b'Matana. I'm giving you this etrog as a matana. Iris, here, I'll give you 1 minute. Va'acharecha liploni. And when the guy gave it to the second guy, in other words, Reuven gave it to Shimon. Shimon said, "Hey, I don't have the lulav etrog. Can I have borrow yours?" So Reuven said to him, "Yes, I'm giving it to you as a gift, but va'acharecha liploni. After you're done with it, give it to so and so." So Mark already alluded to this before. It's like Rabban Gamliel said to Mishua, when you're done, I want you to give it to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Now, that's not what happened in the actual story, but in this version, that's the equivalent. So the Nadlo Rish v'Yatzabo. So and the first one took it, and he was Yotzei. Right? It says in the Gemara that he was Yotzei. Banu Machloket Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. And then the Gemara itself, and Kuf Lamed Zayin B'Alef Bava Batra says, "Oh, we've arrived at Machloket Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel." Right? So wait a minute. What do you mean the Machloket of Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel? Again, Rabbi holds that the first guy who gets it, so in other words, is Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven owns it. He lets Shimon own it, but he tells him, when you're done, give it to Levi. And what does Shimon do? He decides to sell it to Yehuda. So, Eina Rishon Yachol Amachro. The first guy cannot sell it to somebody else. And you know what? If he sold it, the second guy, meaning Levi, can go get it from Yehuda and say, "Excuse me, it says that I'm supposed to get it after Shimon's done." Reuven said, Shimon uses it and gives it to Levi. Look, I have basically the equivalent of a contract. And Shimon had no business selling it to you, Yehuda. He wasn't allowed to do that. That wasn't the terms. Therefore, I, Levi, can come and pick it out of your house, pick it up, and it's mine now to use. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel disagrees. He says, no. If Reuven gave it to Shimon, he told him, it's yours completely, and when you're done with it, give it to so-and-so. That's a suggestion. The first guy could sell it. Otherwise, he never owned it. Matana Gemura means you can do what you want with it. And the main way of showing that you own something is you can sell it. So the second guy, namely Levi, he's really the third guy, but the second guy in the transfer, he's only allowed to really get whatever's left over from the first guy because he gave him the goof of the etrog. He gave him the object of the etrog itself. And so the Ketzot Hachoshen goes on to say, you can read right here, the Amrin on Ola, and it says, Amrin on Hacha, imefik lo nafik, lemaya vina nihalei, elamefak lekule amanafik. Sorry, and it describes, if he was not going to be Yotzei in receiving the etrog, then why did he bother giving it to him? Rather, it says, he was Yotzei according to all opinions, Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, right? L'kul hamanafik. But rather, what's the case? Ela machra o achla ban lamachlok at Rabbi Shimon Gamliel ayin sham. Look in the Gemara in Bava Batra Lamed Zayin. It says no. It means that either Shimon sold it or Shimon ate it. He left him a little piece, and he said, "Oh, acharecha ploni Levi, I was meant to give you this. Gives him the pitzim. It's all that's left. It was delicious." So he gives it to him, right? So muvur de gabe etrog leRabbi Shimon Gamliel vare nafik bei came this far the not l'rishon haguf in king shalahu legamre. In that machloket, Rabbi says there's like a limited, even though he gave it to him completely because he stipulated it had to go to the next person. There was a limitation of what he could do with the object. But according to Shimon Gamliel, he gave it to him 100%. So he gave him the guf ha'etrog, right? So va'afagav da'amar achrech ploni, even though he told him, Reuven said to Shimon, when you're done with it, you got to give it to Levi. Lo havi kemo shol. It's not like it's borrowed. Because when you borrow something from someone, you get the peirot, means you get the benefit, the fruits that come from that thing that you've borrowed. You borrow the hammer, you can use it for that purpose. You borrow some guy's hammer, where is my hammer? I sold it on eBay. You cannot do that, right? So, but when he said, heavy haguf larishon, the body of it, the object itself was given to Shimon. V'im kain mali acharecha liploni acharecha le'atzmi. And now, what's the difference between a guy who says, when you're done with it, give it to Levi, or when you're done with it, give it back to me, Reuven? V'harei achar sha'a le'atzmi nami kana mikabel et aguf arazman v'shelo mamashu. Right? So after the time frame has come and gone, i.e. that he's actually been Yotzei, so we could say he was koned automatically. He was makabel the goof, right? Sorry, the individual Shimon says, I got it, it's mine, right? It's mamash. The Tanai is almanash tachzireu enel mishum dim. Now, why? Now the Ketzot has to answer for one small question, which he's addressing now. I know, I'm so sorry, I'm ignoring you. I didn't mean to ignore it, but I want to finish this point. So
no, you answered my you answered the question.
Okay, fine. So there's one last thing that Ketzot has to answer for. In our Gemara, in Masechet Sukka, the expression is Rabbi Gamliel gave it to this one, gave it to this, and gave it back. And Rava says it's amanach tachzireuli, right? So it's milta agav urcha. But the Hachoshen has to admit, and he knows there's a problem here. In the case from Bava Batra, Reuven said to Shimon the two words v'acharech liploni. He didn't say shetachzireuli. So why is there a distinction? Why in the Gemara Bava Batra is v'acharech liploni, and the Gemara in Sukkot says amanash tachzireuli, right? So v'hatnai amanash tachzireu, the expression so that you will return it. Eino elo mishum dim haya omer v'achar sha'a le'atzmi. Had he actually said them something like after such and such an amount of time it belonged to me, havili dina da'acharecha to English sheni alamashashir. So it would have been the expression, had he said it that way, the Tanai of almanach tachzireuli is to forestall the following possibility. Had he said to him, after such and such an amount of time, it reverts back to me, it would be the same thing as saying, after you've been Yotzei, you have to give it to Levi. When you're Yotzei, it goes over to Levi automatically. So what would happen? Levi would only get what's left over. The im kain, therefore, im machro achla lohayel shiur. And then if the second party, maybe the first party, I mean Shimon, sold it or ate it, so nothing left. Matana amanat matna amanat tachzireu. Therefore, he made a condition on condition that you will return it. Not telling me that you sold it, not licking your lips that you have a pitum left, not here's what's left of it. I want the object back. So he's giving him the object until the time that he's Yotzei, and he's just adding the words amanash tachzireuli to say that I want the object back. But really, when he said amanash tachzireuli, Hachoshen wants to argue against the Rosh, against the Ritva. As soon as the guy was Yotzei, Shimon was Yotzei, it's Reuven's again. Automatic. So but he's nervous that since really it's a Matana Gemura based on the Gemara in Bava Batra, Kuf Lamed Zayin, if Shimon really wanted to, he could still take the object, still physically in his possession, and sell it off to Levi, or he could eat it. But if he said Amanash Tachzireli, it doesn't belong to you the minute that you finish. There's a time limit on your ownership, and then I want the object back. But the body of the matana is only for a period of time. Now the Ketzot Hachoshen, I will give you a part of it. It goes on and on and on. He starts saying, if you look in the Rosh of a Batra, you're going to see he's really saying that also, which makes what he's saying here even more baffling. I don't understand what he's telling you. It doesn't make any sense. But my point here was just to show you sort of conceptually that even though the Gemara uses language that seems pretty clear, I'm giving it to you completely, but the conditions you have to give it back to me exactly. It turns out it's not so clear. The Ketzot Hachoshen says, yeah, but there's another Gemara makes it sound like there's a time limit on this and that it does revert back. So why do you use that expression? He just doesn't want to find out that the guy sold it out from under him. It's not resolved, but it's just something to consider about what it means. France, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
To me, it seemed a lot simpler if the original owner, I own it, I give it to you. You, when you're done, give it back to me. Then I have the right to do, I'll give it to the next person, rather than passing it down the line.
I think that's part of the chiddush of the story.
The further away it gets from the owner,
the harder it is.
Problem.
Yeah. That's, look, that's what we have the story on 41b. That's the story. That's what the sages did. It seems with the consent of Rabbi Gamliel, he wasn't screaming, what are you doing with my lulav? I didn't give you permission for that. He's saying, okay, yeah, sure, go ahead. Right. But you're right. But the point is, the linchpin of the whole thing is the last person has to bring it back to the original owner.
You're putting the onus on the last person, but it gets to him, it might be, excuse the expression, might be garbage already and not useful, not what it's supposed to be.
Fair point.
Okay.
Fair point. Yeah, no, so you're saying the right thing for sure. But just think about it, in the congregational context of these house sets, right? So what do you do on the first day? Someone uses it, should put it back down when they're done for the next person picks it up. Or you could say, no, the minute the person picked it up and shook it, they were Yotzei. And now it reverted back to belonging to the original owner, congregation or Torah, which everyone is it's the owner owned by the shul. Now it goes back to the person and back round and round we go, right? So in a related vein, and I'm sorry, Art's not on the phone with us tonight. Art had brought up the question, I'd said last time we learned that to my knowledge, on the second day of Yantif, for us in Chutz La'aretz, these halachas don't apply. Meaning, if you're you have a situation where Sukkot is on Shabbat, and the first day of Sukkot is Sunday. So, the second day of Sukkot is Sunday. When you pick up the lulav and etrog, you say Shechianu. It's the first time you're taking them in hand. Right. But what about lending them out? What about other days when it's derabanan? There's no condition of lachem that has to be fulfilled. It's the kachtem lachem by Marisha. What about the other days? So I just sort of said offhandedly, to my knowledge, like the second day of Yantif is actually only derabanan l'chol hadeo. Art made a very good case, I thought, to me offline, what have you, that there are many. Sounds like the Rama himself is saying, no, you should be careful the second day of Yantif as well. But what's fascinating is, and it's beyond the scope of what we have time for, and maybe probably not beyond the scope of what our purview is, because we're not learning a halacha shir here, we're doing dafka Gemara, but just one point about it, the Mishnah Berurah seems to say, well, you should be machmir for it in second day Sukkot, but then the Bir Halacha basically ends up quoting at the end from the Bikur Yaakov saying, but no one's machmir for this. No one's machmir. Second day, it's totally Rabbanan. The Rambam holds the second day of Yom Tif and Chutz La'aretz, for these purposes, totally Rabbanan. And the Aruch HaShulchan seems to also make the case that the second day, you have to treat it like the first day in terms of Matana and Lhachzir, etc., and be worried about lachem issues. But then he also says, but the minig is, we don't do that.
You say Shachiyanu too.
You do Shachiyanu on the second day because that's the first time you're doing the mitzvah. Right? But it's not because it's fake of the Yoma and this might be the first day of Yantif. How do I know? Because let's say on a year when Sukkot's first day is not Shabbos, so I say Shechinu on the first day and the second day, as opposed to like the Kiddush where you say Shechinu both days, because on the Itzumo Shel Yom, the Kiddush of the day, the Shechinu day one, Shechinu day two, because we have this institutionalized thing we call Sveika Diyoma, but really, we know which day is the first day, which is the second day, which is why we don't say Shechinu on the Lulav the second day. Follow? Yeah, Judah, go ahead, please. You're muted. I know Shemana. Open, unmute.
Heard it again. How about now?
Yeah, we hear you. Go ahead.
We say the Motzai Yom Rishon Sfirat HaOmer. Correct?
Right.
Which means that the second day is already Mimacharat HaShabbat. It cannot have the same rule as.
Right. I thought you were going to ask me another question, which is why I was smiling. I thought you were going to say, how come no Sfeika Diyoma for Sfira? Should say tonight is the second night, or maybe it's the third night of Sfira. Maybe it's the fourth night, or maybe it's the fifth night. Because it's Sfeika Diyoma. We don't have that. We simply don't have that. We start counting, But your point is well taken, though, and that's the reality of how things shake out, right? It's a separate study, but I wanted to make the point that there are those who hold, you should be machmir the second day, etc. By the by, for the second day of Sukkot also is a question about various psulim that are psulim deoraita, that are not psulim derabbanan, that you let slide already on day 2. You're already day 2 of Yom Tov. So
Did
just,
you mean
just for consideration?
Did you mean
Yep.
to say? No, I just was. You can make a joke. Did you mean to say how things shake out?
I had no intention of that pun, but thank you. That brings some levity to the moment. Okay. Can we be bold and just move a little farther ahead in the Gemara? That was sort of just the cerebral part, think about it conceptually a little bit. I want to move a little bit farther in the Gemara just so we could see something beautiful tonight. And next we learn, God willing, we will need to expand it. But it does not look likely that we'll be able to have a shiur next week. And I'll tell you why in less than 5 minutes if you stay on the line after I shut the recorder. But I'm not recording that for reasons you'll understand momentarily. But we will not be able to have a shiur next week. Now it's confirmed as of tonight. So the Gemara goes on to say the following, or at least not at night. Maybe we could do it in the morning or something for those who are around. We're up to in the Gemara where it mentions about why did we need to know? Why do we need to know how much Rabbi Gamliel paid for it? Answers the Gemara, to show you how precious the mitzvahs were for them, for the Chachamim, that he's willing to pay 1,000 zuz. There's a big halachic diun over here. How much do you have to spend on a positive mitzvah? To bankrupt yourself? Rabbi Gamliel, of course, is a great Chacham. He's also from the house of the Nasi. He's wealthy. So is 1,000 zuz a lot for him? A little? Is it exorbitant? Is it off the charts? It's not clear. So comments of Chavivut Alain. So Amrlei Mar Bar Amemar, the Rav Ashi. Mar Bar Amemar, sister Rav Ashi. Abat Saluye Kamatzli Bey. My father would hold the lulav in his hand when he davened. He said the Shemona Esrei, whatever he was davening, he would have it in his hand the whole time. Look at Rashi here. So this is an extension, good example, the associative principle of Shas. We talked about why do you pay so much? Because the mitzvah is so beloved, which reminds us of something else about this mitzvah being beloved. That's the connect. It's literally the connection. And he held it in his hand because it was wondrous to him. He loved it. So Meitfe, wait a second. We have halacha psukul yochaz adam tefillin biyadav v'sefer Torah b'cheikav v'yitpalel. But should not hold tefillin in their hands, not wearing, but holding in hand, or sefer Torah in their like folded in, against their chest while they're davening. That's a halacha. We say that till today. You can't just like stam hold a sefer. Mentioning to Mark on the way home, right? We were talking about it. There's a big shiloh when the Siddur was invented as a printed book. It's right at the beginning of the Terumat Hadeshen. Rav Yisrael Isser line. Is a Siddur something you're allowed to hold while you daven, or is it also something you cannot hold? You can't urinate when you have these things in your hand. Don't sleep. Not sleeping, set, fixed, not sleeping in a haphazard way. Va'amar Shmuel, and Shmuel also adds, Sakin ka'ara kikaramot, hari elu kiyotze behen. Hata. So all these things. You can't have a knife. You can't have a plate filled with food or whatever it is, and you can't have a loaf of bread, and you can't have money in your hand. None of those things, and nothing like it. So the Gemara answers first of the wide lines. Hatam lav mitzvah ninhu v'tarid behu. Those items, none of them are mitzvah items, or they're not mitzvah items at that moment. So you're going to be concerned you're dropping them. So you're not thinking about davening. But hacha mitzvah ninhu v'lotarid behu. But this, the lulav, the longer you hold it, the greater mitzvah it is, it seems, and therefore you're not worried that you're going to drop it. It's an accoutrement, as Mark and I discussed on Shabbos, an accoutrement to tefillah. And that ultimately is the answer about the siddur. It's an accoutrement to tefillah. It helps you daven better if you don't know the words by heart. So you hold it in your hand. It's not a distraction. It's part of what you're doing. There would be a shaila about holding a phone as a siddur in your hand, but I won't go there for tonight. But at least worthy of consideration. You're literally holding in your hand that which buzzes, beeps, and has alerts going on the screen the whole time. So put it in airplane mode. Okay, maybe, but if not, so all right. So but it says, but hacha mitzvah ninu v'lo b'hu. One last piece over here, and then we'll stop. Rabbi Lhachzir bar Tzadik Omer, Kach Hayam Minhagin Sha'an Shir Shalayim. Adam Yotzim Mibeit V'Lulav B'Yado. this was the minhag of the people of Yerushalayim, so beautiful. What did they do? They would leave their house carrying their lulav. It was a walled city, so no problem with Erev, but also in Yom Tov, it wasn't a problem anyway. So the lulav was in hand. Holchu beit hakneset lulav biyado. Kori kriyat shema umitpala v'lulav biyado. Umitpala shmi kriyat shema shema. Umitpala means the amida, and they're holding lulav. Kori b'torah v'shona v'nosed kapav. If they had to do kriyat Torah or they had to roll the Torah, hold it in their hand, or they had to do Nesir Kapayim, some Nichal Gabi Karka, they'll put it on the ground. The Mefarshim say upright, didn't mean you threw it on the ground, but you left it on something else. Holich Levakir Chol Menachem Avelim, Lava Biyado. Nichlas the Beit Midrash, Mishagel Lava Biyad Beno, Biyad Avdo, Biyad Shlucho, My Kamashmal Odecha Kama Heyu's reason the mitzvah. If you went to the Beit Midrash to go learn, so Rashi says you're going to be so involved in the learning, we're worried it'll get damaged. So you have to give it over to somebody else. Give it to your child, your Eved, your Shliach. But otherwise, you hold it in they held it in their hands the whole time. Why? What did it teach you? To show you how reason they were in mitzvahs, how much alacrity they had in mitzvahs, and therefore they could hold it in their hand the entire day. They're sitting at lunch, they're eating their lunch with one hand, and they have the lulav in the other hand. Everything they did was related to holding the lulav in hand. Okay, that's all we have time for tonight. God, we will learn again soon. I wish everyone just all the best. And one more note, I'm going to turn the recorder off and explain.